Welcome, welcome, welcome. Welcome to episode number
23
of the American System of Political Economy podcast with nobody other than, drum roll please, the world's leading authority on the subject of the American System of Political Economy, Mr. Neil Martin. Mr. Neil Martin. Mr. Neil Martin, as usual, I'm sure 23 episodes in, our audience is used to this by now. He's gone into the archives and has brought us another one of those golden nuggets from a time way in the distant past. William Elder. William Elder. I believe this is probably the second time you're getting to meet William Elder, but it only gets better because, like fine wine, Mr. Elder and his co-thinkers in the American school, they just get better and better with age. So before Neil dives in, I'm going to give a brief intro. The political economy book that Neil is going to be drawing from today is an expression of political fighting. William Elder, 1806 to 1885, Somerset, Pennsylvania, Keystone State. Writer of two outstanding books in political economy, was born to two Irish parents. Elder was a close friend of Henry C. Carey. Henry C. Carey. He even gave Carey's memorial address. Neil can only describe it as the highest honor bestowed on to Elder. The political economy book is a testament to how man is fundamentally good and is not a slave to nature. The American system of political economy is number one. No other school of political economy has had political economy reach new levels. The great political economists have political economy on new platforms. Political economy books also show us how important domestic commerce is. They detail that we have always got into hardships when we abandoned domestic commerce or did not have domestic commerce. Foreign trade that was irrational or invasive never did a country right. But yet, free traders say foreign trade brought about peace the most. They do not say what brought credit alive, though. Domestic commerce has interests that are subordinate, improving each other and feeding off one another to cherish and to elevate man. Domestic commerce, it advocates cherish credit the most. An economy based on the American system uses credit the wisest. They revere man in the image of the Creator the most. They want an economy to make the earth the great labor savings bank. They will have agriculture be a science. The farmer will have bankers with a spectacular view of man, and they will be devoted to the harmony of interests. The farmer will have the home market too. Manufacturers will have us see how important a diversity of employment is. The talents of the nation will not be buried. The talents increase the energy flux density of the economy. Thus, the sciences will benefit the manufacturers just like agriculture. Bankers will cherish manufacturers as with agriculture. Free trade bankers are not bankers for the harmony of interests. Manufacturers of the American system will support Glass-Steagall, and so would agriculture. Commerce will have basic economic infrastructure service the economy. The sciences will play an instrumental part too. Domestic commerce will play a part in increasing the potential relative population density. Commerce will be cherished by bankers too. They know that the harmony of interest is what a national debt should be tied to. The good banker would see a national debt as a national blessing, a chance for mankind to show how he participates in God's intelligence. Thus, the nation's national ability will thus be shown. Quantitative easing will never show this. Those who created QE do not want subordination of the interests. They want them to be insubordinates and not be parts of the whole. Political fighting as a serious task. It is not a task that will depict the world as one dedicated to the zero-sum game. Real political economy will never say that irrational free trade is the way to peace. Peace through strength will drive us closer into limiting our destiny. Limiting our destiny is the task of the Enlightenment's British free trade. We want the American system. Not only does the British system want man to have a limited destiny, they want governments to do the least possible. How is this going to promote the general welfare? Promote those that want credit for the world. Kick the British out of every country. I repeat that. Kick the British out of every country. To make the case for why is not just important, but is an absolute imperative. I would like to introduce you once again to none other than the world's leading authority on the subject of the American system of political economy, Mr. Neil Martin. Neil, take it away.
All right, Victor. So this presentation is called William Elder to do Sublime Political Fighting, Promote Credit. Man versus the British Enlightenment. Next slide, Victor. Questions of the Day, Economic and Social by Dr. William Elder. Published in Philadelphia, publisher Henry Carey Baird. Industrial publisher, 406 Walnut Street, 1871. Now, in political economy, when you're doing political fighting, it has to be for a purpose. It has to be for a purpose that is going to show that mankind knows that man is God's masterpiece. So if man is God's masterpiece, how can someone say man has a limited destiny? How can someone say man is an animal? If we have a limited destiny, how can there be a credit system? The view of man is the ultimate key. Forgetting that they are carrying over such facts from that world of animal life, whose destiny is limited, and whose creatures are incapable of the liberties of progressiveness, which is the distinguishing ingredient of responsibility, to the world of man, whose fortunes and fate are not bounded by his instincts, but who is the master of the conditions on which his well-being depends, and must therefore, in his constitution and capabilities, be adjusted to his destiny. The assumption that man is only a beast as to the laws of his life and his relation to surrounding things is not a safe starting point for a philosophy of his nature and fortunes. Okay, so William Elder is of the opinion that mankind does not have a limited destiny. Now, if someone has a limited destiny, what is your view of man? Are they going to say that man is God's masterpiece? Are they going to say that man makes the earth the great labor savings bank? No. They want to cripple man, they want to cripple progress, and they don't want man to elevate himself. Now, the school that sees man as having a limited destiny, where do they come from? They come from the British Enlightenment. We're going to get to the British Enlightenment in a little while. But what we have to focus on, right? Take a look at this. And whose creatures are incapable of liberties of progressiveness, which is the distinguishing ingredient of responsibility. Ah, so as mankind advances, his responsibility grows. And if mankind's responsibility grows, we know that he's progressing, right? Now, the British Enlightenment, the British School of Free Trade, they don't want mankind having responsibilities. How do I know that they don't want mankind having responsibilities? Well, if you're not making advancements, how are you multiplying your responsibilities? A responsibility for man is to leave the best bounty to the future. How are we going to leave the best bounty to the future if man has a limited destiny? Then we look at this part. Elder says man is not bounded by his instincts. All right, so if man is not bounded by his instincts, man has more than just instinct, right? William Elder also says man is the master of the conditions in which he lives in, right? So this is saying mankind is not a slave of nature. And if mankind is not a slave of nature, what can he do? Well, he's only going to show that man is God's masterpiece, right? William Elder goes even further. He talks about the constitution of man and his capabilities are adjusted to his destiny. So if you think that man has a limited destiny, his constitution is weak and his capabilities are weak. If you think man has an infinite destiny, you think man's constitution and capabilities make him be able to be master of his conditions, right? And then through all this, that is all said, the dismal science, they have already said or stated that man has a limited destiny. Okay. Man has a limited destiny. What type of economic policies are going to come out of somebody's mouth if they say man has a limited destiny? They're not going to talk about credit. Credit is man's masterpiece. That's what credit is. It's man's masterpiece, right? And so, starting the philosophy of man, stating that he's just an animal, is not a good starting point to talk about mankind. If we're going to talk about mankind, we're going to say man participates in the intelligence of the creator. That's a good starting point for discussing man. A horrible, bad starting point of discussing man is calling him an animal. And throughout the presentation, we are going to see what the British system, the British Enlightenment thinks about man. Next slide, Victor. So here we're going to introduce people to the British Enlightenment and to what William Elder thought about the British Enlightenment. Now, one thing that I have to say, William Elder is the first protectionist in the 19th century, or the first or second to say that the protectionist school has beef with the Enlightenment. Right? So the British Enlightenment is praised for everything good that has come out of civilization. I disagree with that. I don't think anything good has come out of the British Enlightenment. And William Elder is going to speak about this. The misuse of the a posteriori or inductive method in matters to which it does not apply, of which it is wholly incapable, is the vice of our metaphysics and our political economy. And it is owing to this that neither of them is truly a science, or even capable of rendering safe service throughout their respective realms of study. The most rigid of the Baconian philosophers, who thinks it unsafe to venture beyond the circuit of his five senses, cannot object to our assuming just what he must assume before he can reason at all on anything of the past that is left only its vestiges, or anything of the future which affords only its hints of the unarrived. Okay, so the main part of this quote is William Elder saying that the a posteriori method is vice in metaphysics and political economy. Who are the vice? Who are the vices of political economy? Adam Smith, Thomas Malthus, David Ricardo, John Ramsay McCulloch, and John Stuart Mill. Okay, so William Elder is saying the inductive method, the a posteriori method, brings vice to political economy. Now, if we take a look at a number one saying of Adam Smith likes to say, buy in the cheapest market. Well, if you buy in the cheapest market, are you developing the productive powers of labor? No. Are you creating a diversity of employments? No. Are you employing capital properly? No. Are you going to call for massive credit to build infrastructure? No. If you think that we should base everything on cheapness in economics, how in the world are you going to propose your country joining the Belt and Road initiatives of China, right? If we think buying in the cheapest market is the holy grail, how are we going to progress? How is credit even going to be in the vocabulary of people, right? Do people really think credit comes from people who says buy in the cheapest market? That is ridiculous. Then we have Thomas Malthus. Thomas Malthus is of the opinion that food grows arithmetically and man grows geometrically. What is he saying? He is saying that food grows more, way more, geometrically wise, than man. So that is essentially saying that the creator, who created a masterpiece, has been placed in a situation from which he can't be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, and subdue it. Man has not been given an unfair challenge. Mankind has been given a challenge to be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, and subdue it. Right? Now, this type of attitude, is this type of attitude going to call for credit? Is this type of attitude going to seek the general welfare as necessary if we have public credit. Thomas Malthus did not want to employ people in a way that states man is God's masterpiece. He didn't want to do that. Why? Because he thinks that mankind has a limited destiny. And if you think mankind has a limited destiny, why would you think that mankind can replenish and subdue the earth? Thomas Malthus was of the opinion that mankind had a limited destiny. Right? Then we go to his sidekick, not his sidekick, his good friend, David Ricardo. David Ricardo, another vice of political economy. David Ricardo was of the opinion that mankind habitats the best lands first. He is unable to replenish them or subdue them. So he goes on to the next land. He's unable to replenish them or subdue them. He just goes on to the next land and there's no improvement. This is essentially saying that man's labor will fail him, that man's labor is not enough. Now, why would God, who sees mankind as his masterpiece, allow for political economy to be contaminated with a vice? God did not create man for man to say that he is unable to be fruitful, multiply, replenish the earth, and subdue it. The British Enlightenment thinks that man has a limited destiny. And if man has a limited destiny, what are they going to think of credit? Well, today we have people who say we don't want a national debt. All national debts are evil. We got to pay off the national debt. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't have to pay off the national debt right away. You could use it to employ people. You can use it as credit to build up the economy, to build up third world countries. What's wrong with doing that? That is showing that man's labor is able to be creative and have him prosper, right? But the people who do not want a national debt, what school do they fall under? The British Enlightenment or the American system of political economy? Because the people who saw the national debt as a national blessing, such as His Excellency General Alexander Hamilton, he saw a national debt as a national blessing. And what other ideas did Alexander Hamilton have other than credit? A wonderful, beautiful policy. Alexander Hamilton wrote the report on the subject of manufacturers. He could not write that if he had a view of man that stated man has a limited destiny. Alexander Hamilton wrote the report on the subject of manufacturing thinking that man is God's masterpiece, right? And so this whole concept of, we don't want a national debt. What about credit? The people that say we do not want a national debt, how do they see mankind? Do they see mankind as in judging mankind off of his character and not by his income? If you only want to see mankind as useless, what type of employment are you going to give them? Right? The vice in political economy is hegemonic. We have to say that. Why is there vice in political economy? It's because of the British system. It's because of the British Enlightenment, right? And William Elder, is, as I said, is either the first or second political economist, either him or Henry Carey, that attacks the British Enlightenment. But I got news for you. Edgar Poe attacked the British Enlightenment. Jonathan Swift attacked the British Enlightenment. Jonathan Swift was a protectionist, right? So the British Enlightenment, who is fighting the British Enlightenment? William Elder. And William Elder is all in on credit. We are going to find out about what William Elder says about credit. But before this happens, I have to instill in people's mind that the British Enlightenment did not want mankind using a national debt as a national blessing. They did not see credit as man's masterpiece. Yes, I said it. Credit is man's masterpiece. And if credit is man's masterpiece, mankind must be an artist that he keeps on producing, and producing. Mankind will put his most fabulous work into poetry. He will then set that poetry into music. Are the free traders and the British Enlightenment thinking about doing this? Thinking about saying that mankind is God's masterpiece. And we are going to show you what God's masterpiece can do. God's masterpiece does not represent vice in political economy. I am sorry, but buying in the cheapest market, saying that mankind cannot replenish and subdue the earth, saying that a national debt is bad and we should not have a national debt, is the reason why we have vices in political economy. And we have to take the vices out of political economy. The vices of political economy create economic disabilities for nations. What can we do to get rid of these economic disabilities? Victor, next slide. Okay. So what can get rid of the economic disabilities? Credit can do that. I call credit the most unheralded art. It is God's bounty, right? Now, here we have William Elder speaking about credit. This addition, which credit adds to capital by being well based upon itself, is the grand feature of the policy. In it lies the master power to which the growth of the general wealth is due, and especially is it the beneficent element in the business life of man, which mitigates the inequalities of individual wealth. Credit acknowledges the worth of character. The man who has no other property is made capital in himself for his own benefit, and talents and industry are thus lifted out of the disabilities of poverty into their utmost servableness to society. Credit is the motor force that raises indigence into wealth, and so converts selfishness into beneficence in its effects, and greatly tends to conform to the sentiment to the excellent of the providential results. Here we have William Elder talking about credit. William Elder says credit adds to capital. The only capital the free traders know about, the British Enlightenment know about, is physical money, material money, coins, paper currency, right? Now, William Elder is saying credit is the master power. Because of credit, we have growth of the general wealth. So the general wealth grows with credit. Man does not have a limited destiny when he is using credit. Now, my understanding of credit comes from Lyndon LaRouche talking about what FDR did to the United States of America. And what FDR did for the United States of America, FDR saw man as God's masterpiece. I'm going to repeat this quote by William Elder a little bit. Credit acknowledges the worth of character. The free trade school, the Epstein class, does not see any worth in man. They don't look at his character. They see mankind as a beast, an animal, a slave of nature. If you see mankind as a slave of nature, what type of opportunities are you going to give? Are you going to give to them? Are you going to be proud of them? No, you are not. But FDR was. FDR acknowledged the worth of character of the forgotten man. And LaRouche conveyed this. The principle of credit is an ultimate way to show your view of man. Right? Let me repeat this again. Credit acknowledges the worth of character. British imperialism, who wanted to be the workshop of the world, mutated and then created cheap labor havens. They're not going to say credit acknowledges the worth of character. If you acknowledge the worth of character, you see man as equal. All men are created equal. They are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, which amongst them is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Credit wants to have mankind engaged in the pursuit of happiness. But we're not done there yet, right? I was talking about economic disabilities. We're in the 21st century and economic disabilities are still here. The disabilities of poverty are still here, right? Let's see what William Elder had to say on credit. William Elder stated that the talents and industry of men lift mankind out of economic disabilities, as in the economic disabilities are gone once you apply credit into an economy. Productive credit, right? Just take a look at this view of man. Just take a look at this, right? William Elder says, the man who has no other property, the man that has no other property, which is seen as nothing and cattle from the Epstein class and the British system. Elder continues, is made capital in himself for his own benefit, and talents and industry are thus lifted out of the disabilities of poverty and to their utmost servableness to society. That is the role of credit. To vanquish and destroy the disabilities of poverty, and to have mankind serve society in the best way ever. That is the role of credit. This can never be said by the dismal science. This can never be said by the British free traders. This can never be said by the British Enlightenment. As I said, the British Enlightenment, they do not see man as God's masterpiece. The British Enlightenment, they are incapable of producing someone like a Lyndon LaRouche. They are incapable of producing someone like an FDR. They are incapable of producing the American system of political economy. Go to the next slide, Victor. Okay, Europe has a problem. Same thing with the United States. We don't want to use credit, or we've outlawed credit. The EU outlawed credit with the Maastricht Treaty. There's some loopholes. The United States of America is not using credit. Right? Europe loves being savage states. Why is America and Europe a bunch of savage states? A society without a credit system is simply savage. A business economy whose capital should be limited to material property, cash, will be a despotism of property, as inflexible as Hindu caste, and as dead as the insensate earth, where all that is precious is in the fixity of crystals, and all that is common is as incapable as the rocks in which the gold and silver are confined. William Elder is calling nations that do not have a credit system savage. What have they done? What have they done to the civilization? When FDR became president of the United States of America, America was not a savage state. Germany was not a savage state in the 1930s. In the early 1930s, they weren't. They could have had a credit system, the Lautenbach Plan. It wasn't adopted. And we see what happened to Germany, right? The United States of America, they had a credit system. And who used that credit system? Someone that said the forgotten man needs to be elevated. FDR, right? FDR gave the population cultural optimism. And people who give the population cultural optimism are going to use credit. They are not savages, right? Then we have this line that says whose capital should be limited to material property. William Elder says this is going to do is bring death upon the nation. It's not going to have the earth be the great labor savings bank. It's going to have the earth barren, right? But there's one thing that is water to the land. Credit. Credit is water to land. And when you apply credit to the economy, man is not a slave of nature. The economic disabilities go away. One more thing, right? The British system saw economic disabilities as a sign of overpopulation. If you see economic disabilities as a sign of overpopulation, why would you use a credit system? Because the credit system will battle these economic inequalities. The credit system will battle the economic disabilities. The credit system has mankind be more creative, right? The credit system has man be more creative. If you just have an economy where you just have cash and coins, right? You don't have the ability to generate funds for an emergency. You don't have the ability to have credit. And what's credit? Long-term interest credit. Stable currency. We have a Bretton Woods. Stable currency. We don't have a fluctuating currency, because if you have a fluctuating currency, how can you have credit? Credit died for the world when the Bretton Woods was destroyed. And Lyndon LaRouche forecasted that. one of the worst things that happened to the global South was the Cold War. Now, if we take a look at the United States, with its Cold War mentality, they can never see man for his character. They can never see man for his true worth, right? And if you can't see man for his true worth, why would you go out of your way and say we need credit to be flexible so the government can be flexible? We don't want a government that's inflexible, right? We want a government that is going to make the earth the newest sphere, right? So the way that we're going to make the earth the newest sphere is that we need credit. We are not going to make the earth the newest sphere if we do not have credit. We should not be savages. Mankind is not a savage. The British Enlightenment sees mankind as a savage. They disagree with God treating mankind as a masterpiece. If you do not treat man as a masterpiece, you see him as a savage. And who wants to see man as a savage? The people who put vice in political economy. Next slide, Victor. All right. So people like to talk about foreign trade as foreign trade and free trade being the economic holy grail. They don't seem to notice that European powers use foreign trade to destroy countries and make them into colonies and to oppress them. They didn't want them to have domestic commerce, right? If they didn't want nations to have domestic commerce, do you think they would actually give them credit to develop? No. Irrational foreign trade is not the king of peace. Credit is the king of peace. Domestic commerce is the king of peace. You need credit if you want to have domestic commerce. Okay. It is claimed for foreign trade that it is a peacemaker among nations. This is not its history in the past. Maritime trade, until within the period of 2 centuries last past, was simply what we now call piracy. Its occupation was pillage of chattel, enslavement of men, and extension of dominion in their interest and for the extension of trade. The nobility and gentry of civilized Europe held any form of industry degrading which was not carried on by murder and robbery. Sir Walter Raleigh went abroad upon the high seas with Elizabeth's commission as a privateer, and John Newton served as chaplain in a fleet of slave traders. Okay, so what is this foreign trade? This foreign trade, otherwise known as irrational foreign trade or invasive foreign trade, foreign trade means we will dominate you and there is nothing you can do. If you retaliate, we will demonize you as terrorists. You will have a hard time keeping currency in your country. So irrational foreign trade destroyed the currency, but it also destroyed credit in nations that had credit. The United States of America had credit. When the compromise tariff was passed, and Frederick List spoke about this, he said, listen, the United States of America, their industries were not only destroyed, but their credit was destroyed. You can destroy industries, but if you destroy credit, who's going to see that the credit's destroyed? You can see that industries are destroyed, but can you see that credit is destroyed? The only way you can see if credit is destroyed is if other countries will not give you credit. If other countries If other countries will not give you credit, that is a big problem, right? So the trade system that Europe and the United States of America had countries under was never about the advantage of the other. If we take a look at the trade conducted in the Cold War, we're going to talk about that first, right? That trade had nothing to do with developing domestic commerce in every nation. That trade was all about David Ricardo, produce what you do best, comparative advantage, right? And what did this mean? This meant that there was going to be no development, and they saw man as an animal. They enslaved man. Now we go back into the 19th century to the 19th century, right? Now, if trade is supposed to be the king of peace and a peacemaker, are you actually saying that the British will use a policy to promote the advantage of the other? The British never used a policy to promote the advantage of the other. The British have permanent interest, not permanent allies, right? So if you are going by British free trade, your trade is not about developing the third world. Your trade is not about having prosperous trade partners. That is just not going to happen. If you take a look at the British in the 19th century, who was England's best trade partner? Was it India, their crown jewel, where there was hardly no domestic Congress, and they killed over 80 million Indians in the 19th century? Or was it the United States? The United States was England's best trade partner. And it wasn't because the United States of America was playing buy in the cheapest market. It was because of protectionism. Now, what does foreign trade do? Foreign trade brings death to civilization, right? If you want to bring death to civilization, why would you talk about a credit system? Why would you say that credit has the talents and industry of man lift them out of dire poverty? You're not going to say something like that. And remember, European foreign trade, British foreign trade, right? Let's repeat this. The nobility and gentry of civilized Europe held any form of industry degrading which was not carried on by murder and robbery. That is degrading mankind. That is dehumanizing mankind. Today we have cheap labor havens. Cheap labor havens is murdery and robbery. It is not developing nations. But hey, it's the trade that the British and the British Enlightenment like. Repeat it again. The nobility and gentry of civilized Europe held any form of industry degrading which was not carried on by murder and robbery. So hold on. Protectionism, which protected the labor, that wasn't good labor? That wasn't dignified labor? No, it was dignified labor. It was good labor. But they weren't treated like slaves. They weren't treated like cattle. They weren't treated like chattel. They were treated as if they were worth something. They were treated as if we are going to go by this man's character, not by his income. We are not going to use poverty to make up the excuse saying we will never develop man. We are not going to use poverty and say poverty is the result of overpopulation. We're not going to do that. We are going to have a trade policy, an international trade policy that is going to promote the advantage of the other. Now, I ask you right? So we already see that the British trade, the foreign trade, is not creating peace. If you're not creating peace, how are you going to advocate the Belt and Road Initiative? Let's take a look at the United States of America and Europe. Is Europe and the United States of America advocating the Belt and Road Initiative? The United States of America is at war with Russia and Iran. They are allowing for this war in Ukraine to go on. The Europeans are helping out Ukraine more and more by disrespecting Russia. How are they disrespecting Russia? They are using drones to strike inland of Russia. They're using European airspace. This is from the people who say we only want labor that's degrading. That's what they say. This is from the people who think British free trade and globalization is a peacemaker when it is not. The only way that we are going to have the Belt and Road Initiative is if people see that peace is through development. If people see that man is fundamentally good. If you see man as fundamentally good, if you see man as fundamentally good, you're going to want credit, right? And you will organize trade as to have an advantage of the other. You will not organize trade so you would have countries that never prosper and countries that never grow and countries that never know of credit. Now just take a look at this, right? The most loans or the most private credit that third world countries have known of since the 1970s has been through the IMF. And the IMF, that's not credit. The IMF wants mankind to be working in degrading conditions. They don't see mankind for his worth. They don't see mankind for his character. The IMF would kill the forgotten man. If the IMF went into the United States in the 1930s and there was no FDR, we will be speaking German. Next slide, Victor. Okay, this is going to be a doozy, right? So William Elder is going to be talking about the British, and he's going to tell you what the British want in trade. The British wants to be the world, the workshop of the world. The British, all they want is cheap labor. They don't want labor that is going to give mankind dignity. They don't want labor that says, I want to be a bounty for the future. They are going to degrade mankind, and there will be no political fighters to challenge them. But guess what? If you want to do political fighting, use credit. If you use credit to do political fighting, you will be vehemently against the British. You will be vehemently against the workshop of the world and its next mutation, cheap labor havens. All right. Only a protectionist can say this about the British. There can be no question of his claims in this respect in a country like England, a country which depends in an important degree for its food upon others having more abundant and cheaper agricultural products. Such trade is a necessity of their industrial system. An island that may be covered with a thimble on any good-sized map of the world, determined to make itself mistress of the seas, supreme in the maritime carrying trade, and at the same time, the workshop of the world, must have a philosophy to fit its ambition, and needs to have its system accepted by its tributaries. It needs a foreign system of cheap labor to sustain its own higher rewards, and it needs to have a supporting and conforming policy to keep up the required drainage of the pauperism, which results from its struggle to underwork its customer nations. Wow. William Elder just laid it down. William Elder said that the British need cheap labor. They depend on cheap labor. Now, we just had a section where I said international trade, irrational trade, foreign trade is not a peacemaker. And I just read you this quote. This quote emphatically states that British free trade is not a peacemaker. It needs cheap labor, but we're not even done there yet. William Elder says that system needs a system to be accepted by its tributaries. William Elder is saying that the British needs tributaries for its trade. I'm sorry. If you are conducting trade with foreign nations and you're just going to have them be your tributaries, you are satanic. You are evil. You do not belong in government. You do not belong in civilization. Right? So William Elder just stated that the British needs tributaries for the trade they conduct. Oh my God. Repeat this again. They need tributaries for the trade they conduct. They want to be the workshop of the world. That is a monopoly. But not to Adam Smith. No, not to Adam Smith followers. No. When you say the workshop of the world, the so-called people who are against monopolies, they don't see the workshop of the world as a monopoly. They see it as comparative advantage. And what's comparative advantage based on? Cheap labor. How is this? How, if you are the workshop of the world, how are you going to extend credit to developed countries? They don't go together. That's like saying the United States of America and England have the same interests in the 19th century. That wasn't the case. We had the American system on the American side and the British system on the British side. The United States of America wanted to use credit. If the United States of America wanted to use credit, how could they be the workshop of the world? If the United States of America wanted to use credit to develop the global South, if the United States of America wanted to use credit to develop the global South, how could they be for a workshop of the world? Right? Now, the workshop of the world needed cheap labor. It needed tributaries. We don't want a world like that, where you have one superpower and everybody else is a tributary, which the British wanted. We don't need that. Now, I got news for you, right? The workshop of the world has mutated. Instead of being the workshop of the world, the people with that same disgusting, horrible view of man, they still want cheap labor. And these cheap labor will be in cheap labor havens. And if we take a look at these cheap labor havens, let's say, for instance, Mexico, cheap labor haven. They have a whole lot of illegal immigrants in the United States of America. If cheap labor havens were so democratic and good, how come they lose people? Right? Let's take a look at Bangladesh. Cheap labor haven. A whole lot of Bangladesh are in Europe, Southwest Asia, and America. What are they doing? They're working their butts off to send money to Bangladesh. Right? What does Bangladesh have? Bangladesh is a cheap labor haven. They don't have credit. They will not get credit from the United States or Europe. They will get credit from China. That the United States of America don't like that, right? China built a port in Peru, the most industrialized, state-of-the-art, modern port. What does the United States of America decide to do? The United States of America decides to overthrow the government, right? This is cheap labor haven mentality. We don't want to develop world. We don't want to develop the global South. So the people who brought us British free trade, Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Thomas Malthus, John Ramsay McCulloch, John Stuart Mill, John Carnes, they gave us Britain as the workshop of the world. In the late 20th century and in the 21st century, they gave us cheap labor havens, right? If you're for cheap labor havens, how are you going to have a credit policy? How are you going to see man as God's masterpiece if you have cheap labor havens? Next slide, Victor. Okay. So domestic commerce is box office, right? Domestic commerce is going to use credit the best. Domestic commerce is going to have the idea of using credit to build large-scale infrastructure projects and to develop the world. I am sorry. Free traders and their concubines and mutations are not going to call for nations to have credit to develop the third world and the global South and the world in general. They would rather give you death than commerce. Give me domestic commerce or death. A trade which inflicts a difference in the productive power of a people, which takes from them their support in labor and abrogates the mischief of industrial dependency by all the moral and social evil of feebleness, ignorance, and paralysis in the industrial interests of the community. This is a balance to be deeply considered and vigilantly avoided. William Elder stated, listen, man, if we have a trade and it hurts our productive powers of labor, if it hurts the productive power of the people, we can't have that type of trade. That trade's not going to call for a credit system in a time of crisis. That system is not going to see the worth of man. That system will create cheap labor havens. The system that destroys the productive powers of the people are not going to say that Earth is the great labor savings bank. The people that want to destroy the productive power of the people, they are not going to conduct trade based off of the advantage of the other. If they're not going to conduct trade for the advantage of the other and have countries keep their productive powers of labor or increase their productive powers of labor, we don't need them for trade. We don't need that type of trade system, right? And let's take a look at this. We'll go further, right? All right. So when you do not have a productive power of the people, industrial dependency is created. Moral and social evil happens. Ignorance, and there's paralysis in the national industries. Public credit does not create paralysis. Public credit does not create social evils. Irrational foreign trade create social evils, ignorance, and paralysis of the industrial interest. Just think for a moment. You have a trade. William Elder's talking about it. He says, do not go with this trade that decreases your productive power of your people. If the productive powers of your people don't mean anything to you, how are you going to promote a policy of credit? If the productive powers of the people do not mean anything to you, you are a vice in political economy. You do not see man as God's masterpiece, right? So we have this trade, right? William Elder is recognizing that you have different kinds of trade. One that's going to develop a country and another one that's not going to develop the country. The trade that is not going to develop the productive powers of the people cannot be allowed to exist, right? Now remember what I said previously, right? When we were talking about the British as the workshop of the world and they needed tributaries. The British needed tributaries. If your nation is just a tributary to a world power, how are you going to have productive powers of labor? You're not going to have productive powers of labor. Look at Bangladesh. Look at Mexico. Look at Sub-Saharan Africa. Do they have great productive powers of labor? Is Bangladesh doing what China's doing? Having massive amounts of credit infused into the national economy and have the Belt and Road Initiative? Do the people who like British free trade, do they want to turn Bangladesh and Mexico into a China? Yes or no? Hell no. They don't want to do that, right? If they don't want to do that, we should not follow their trade policy. Their trade policy is going to destroy the productive powers of labor. And once you destroy the productive powers of labor, how are you going to see credit? Let's just take a look at the population of the United States of America. The productive powers of labor has been destroyed. A perfect example to understand how the productive powers of labor is in decay is look at OnlyFans. Look at these sites like OnlyFans, right? What should these women be doing? These women should be using their minds. Their minds should be a reflection that God sees mankind as a masterpiece. But that is not happening. OnlyFans. Does OnlyFans increase the productive powers of labor? No, it doesn't. Right? The British Enlightenment sees nothing wrong with OnlyFans. You're pursuing pleasure. Your lot is not to be the masterpiece of God. What you need to do is that you need to focus on being a tributary of the British. You need to be the tributary of Wall Street and the city of London. Do not employ your people properly. Who came up with that saying? Do not employ your people properly. Do not employ the able-bodied pauper. The British. The British came up with that. Take a look at OnlyFans. These are able-bodied females. Are they being employed properly? They're not being empowered. Their productive powers of labor are insignificant. Do you think they even think about credit for Sub-Saharan Africa? Credit for Ibero-America? Credit for the Global South? No. We have dehumanized labor. When we go with British free trade, we dehumanize labor, we dehumanize mankind, and we have OnlyFans. OnlyFans is a shining example on what happens when you do not increase the productive powers of labor. Next slide, Victor. Divine law. Listen, divine law, providence is box office, right? What providence would you rather have? David Ricardo's providence or William Elder's providence, right? So here we go. Energy flux density exists, not limited economic growth. There is evidently in the progress of things, in the order of providence, working for the deliverance of men from the bondage of animalism and from the limitation in resources and enjoyments, a constant endeavor to substitute the insensate forces of nature for the drudgery of human beings, and to remit them by the route and through the regenerating power of education from one degree of skilled industry to another and a higher, until emancipation shall be complete, till toil shall no longer fail of its best ends, or absorb any more of the life than is consistent with, and promotive of the highest style of life of which man is capable on earth. Okay, so let's pay attention to providence, right? William Elder's idea of providence follows the golden rule. Ricardo's idea of providence distorts God, right? So providence, let's see this again. Providence is working for the deliverance of men from the bondage of animalism and from its limitations in resources and enjoyments. Providence is working to not have man be a slave of nature. That's the only providence I want. The providence that is working to deliver man from being an animal. That's the only progress I want. But the British system, they say, well, a divine law is that food grows arithmetically and humans grow geometrically. Further, another sign of divine law is that man habitats the first lands first. They're productive, but he's unable to replenish them or subdue them. He goes to the next land. They're not that productive. He's not able to replenish them or subdue them. He goes to the next land, and there's a decreasing. You'll see that if his productive powers of labor are not improving, right? His toil is not doing anything good, right? If someone says man toils, does not do anything good, walk away from the person, charge him with an economic war crime, right? Because providence, that's divine law, right? Divine law states that God's masterpiece is the human being, right? Credit is man's masterpiece. So we have credit and providence. Do you think credit is going to choose man as a slave of nature? Or is credit going to choose the right providence that works for the deliverance of man from the bondage of animalism and from its limitations in resources and enjoyments? Oh my gosh, man. William Elder has done us a great service. He introduced providence in this section, right? And he is saying that providence delivers man from the British Enlightenment. That's what providence does. Providence delivers man from the British Enlightenment, right? And we go on even further. William Elder says, through education, man advances one degree of skilled industry to another and a higher until emancipation shall be complete. Emancipation shall be complete. Does the British Enlightenment is the British Enlightenment ever going to say that man's work will emancipate him, that emancipation will be complete, that mankind can complete emancipation, that mankind's toil will lead to emancipation? They will never say that. If they will never say that, how can they advocate the credit system? They do not advocate the credit system because the whole purpose of the credit system, right, is to deliver man from the bondage of animalism, bad government, right? The European population needs to be delivered from the EU and the British. How is that going to happen? Credit. They're going to have to use credit to develop their economies and help develop other nations, right? Then we go on even further, right? As I already stated in the beginning, energy flux density exists, not limited economic growth, right? So William Elder is saying when emancipation shall be complete, we will see that energy flux density has increased. Energy flux density is capable of being increased. There's no such thing as limited economic growth. There's no such thing as that, right? All right. And so, what side of Providence are you on? The British free trade side or the American system of political economy? I'm on the American system of political economy side, right? And then I'm going to wrap up the presentation. William Elder says mankind is capable of the highest style of life on earth. If William Elder is saying that, William Elder is not for the policies of the British Enlightenment. William Elder is for credit. He wants to use credit to do political fighting. And if you use credit to do political fighting, you see and understand that you work with providence to deliver mankind from animalism. This is what we have to do. We have to increase the productive powers of labor. If we are not going to produce, if we're not going to increase the productive powers of labor, how are we going to give the population cultural optimism? How are we going to show that credit is man's masterpiece? Every generation after us should say credit is man's masterpiece. And I'm finished. Thank you.